In the coming year, the world will witness an incredibly rare conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in the first degree of the entire zodiac. This hasn't happened for thousands of years. As astrologers, we know we're going to see events of world historic importance. But what exactly will they be? Well, I foresee a few possibilities. Among them are a massive migration crisis, big trouble for the European Union, a historic milestone involving artificial intelligence, and the establishment of pervasive digital control systems allegedly aimed at achieving climate goals. But where am I getting these predictions from? Well, this video will be an excerpt from a recent 2-hour live stream I gave to World Astrology Report members, in which I demonstrated a technique that allows us to predict the events that come at conjunctions. I'm releasing it on YouTube so that you all get access to this information and to show you some of the benefits that members of World Astrology Report get. I put out long-form live streams for members that go deep into interesting topics in astrology every month. Signing up will give you access to the complete version of the talk in this video, as well as many more on subjects like the Age of Aquarius, the Yuga cycle, and the UFO phenomenon. You'll also get access to ad-free, members-only versions of all my videos, my private forum, and 20% off private consultations with me. So, without further ado, let's get into it. And please do give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more of this sort of content. Now, first of all, credit where credit is due. I want to give credit to a member of World Astrology Report, Christina Rivera, who really put me onto this technique. Her Instagram is the Starry-Eyed Sage. Her website is ChristinaRiveraAstrologyTarot.com. And yeah, just want to give, again, thanks to Christina. If we want to know what a cycle in the future is going to be about, then we want to be able to predict the events that are going to come at conjunctions of planets. And there are different approaches that we could take to that. We can consider the natures of the planets and the sign in which they're meeting. Very simple approach. We can interpret the chart of the conjunction itself. So we can look at when does this conjunction go exact. We can cast a full chart or a related chart, like in an Aries ingress chart, for example, and then interpret that chart. You need a location. You need to choose a location to cast the chart, obviously. So you're really looking at the effects of that conjunction in a particular place when you do that. And then thirdly, you can look at events. That's a weirdly written sentence there, but you can look at what happened during previous alignments of the same kind. So this is what Richard Tarnas calls diachronic patterns. So you could look at what happens at, say, if you're interested in a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is what we're interested in right now, you can look at what happened at previous Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, and you'll tend to find that the same kind of themes often repeat themselves over and over again at conjunctions. But the closing square technique, I think, adds something really important to our toolbox. And essentially what this technique is, it's quite simple really. It's to look at events that took place at the last or closing or waning square of the previous cycle. These events foreshadow events at the next conjunction. Let's look at another example. The Saturn-Pluto COVID-19 cycle, 2020 to 2053. So this is the next Saturn-Pluto cycle, the cycle that we're in right now. This cycle began in 2020 with conjunction of Saturn and Pluto on the 12th of January at 22 degrees and change of Capricorn. So 12th of January. On the right-hand side here, I have a story that I've clipped here. This is a story that appeared in The Guardian on the 11th of January. It said, first death from China mystery illness outbreak. Man dies in outbreak that has infected 41 people as early tests point to new type of the coronavirus responsible for SARS epidemic. So almost bang on this Saturn-Pluto conjunction, we have a death from coronavirus, and we have that whole saga beginning. So I think as a kind of as an aside, some of the themes that were raised by the pandemic are going to be playing out over the course of this Saturn-Pluto cycle, and we'll see major events at the hard aspects of the cycle in particular. But could we have foreseen what was going to come at this Saturn-Pluto conjunction, this pandemic outbreak? Well, we go back to the closing squares. So the closing squares of the previous cycle, this is the 1982 to 2020 cycle, were in 2009 and 2010. Have the charts for these three squares here. Again, there were three. 2009, 2010, that kind of time. What was going on around then? Well, we have the last pandemic that was declared. This is a clip from Wikipedia. The 2009 swine flu pandemic, caused by the H1N1 swine flu influenza virus and declared by the World Health Organization from June 2009 to August 2010, was the third recent flu pandemic involving the H1N1 virus. The first being the 1918 to 1920 Spanish flu pandemic, and the second being the 1977 Russian flu. The first identified human case was in La Gloria, Mexico, a rural town in Veracruz. The virus appeared to be a new strain of H1N1 that resulted from a previous triple reassortment of bird, swine, and human flu viruses, which further combined with a Eurasian pig flu virus, leading to the term swine flu. So we have a pandemic at the time of the closing square. Pandemics, and this is actually the last pandemic before the COVID-19 pandemic. We have epidemics quite a lot, but a pandemic, there are certain definitions that organizations like the WHO use. It has to be, I think, spreading exponentially and international in scope, and they have certain conditions that they apply. But this was the last pandemic right at the time of the closing square of the previous cycle. So you could have perhaps used this technique to foresee another pandemic coming in 2020. You're looking at events, it's 2010, say, you can see this swine flu pandemic is coming on, and you know that Saturn and Pluto are in their closing square. You can be figuring out at that point already, well, in 2020, we might have another pandemic. Let's now apply this technique to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction 2025-2026. So just a couple of chart clippings here. On the left-hand side, you can see Saturn and Neptune, their positions. This is taken on July the 15th of 2025 this year. And you can see that they are very, very close to conjunction here. They are 13 arc minutes away from an exact conjunction. They don't actually make an exact conjunction this year, but they get that close. So it's extremely close. They are conjunct, really. There might be some significance, of course, in the fact that they don't make an exact hit until 2026. On the right-hand side here, you can see the positions of these planets. This is their exact conjunction in the first degree of Aries on February the 20th of 2026. So this is a conjunction that's in play now. It'll be in play through 2026 and through 2027 as well, really. I think we can probably say that 2025 to 2027 is the real period of application or period of effect of this conjunction. Some delineations of Saturn and Neptune in combination. These are just delineations I've come up with. Dissolution of structures. We saw that with the Berlin Wall. Formalizing the ineffable. Manifestations of spirit. Spiritualization of matter. Universalist structures. Dissolving of borders. Structures of belief. You could come up with many, many more. But those are just to give you a flavor of the kind of things that we should be expecting to see over this period in relation to this particular configuration. I've taken a little clipping here from Rules for Planetary Pictures, which is the Uranian astrology rule book, for some more delineations. That book, pretty negative about Saturn-Neptune. It says losses or separation through deception or fraud, habit, things of long duration, sickness, treacherous diseases, chronic ill health, pestilence, chronic conditions, fraud, theft, losses, pestilence or plague. Yeah, not very positive there. I think those delineations leave a bit to be desired, because what I've seen in history, there's quite a lot more that comes at these conjunctions that maybe have to do with some of the delineations that I gave just now. Let's have a look at some previous conjunctions. This is to look at the diachronic patterns that I mentioned earlier. Tarnas's term, diachronic patterns, looking at previous examples of the same configuration and seeing what came up. So we had one of these conjunctions in 1917. We had the Russian Revolution. Very Saturn-Neptune, seems to have a lot to do with communism, which makes sense. Neptune is a planet of sort of universalism, whereas Saturn is structures and the concrete. In communism, we have this kind of system that aims to make the ideal concrete, or sort of some system that makes everybody equal, so to speak. It's very Saturn-Neptune. In the middle, we have the Spanish flu, going back to those delineations from the Uranian rulebook. We saw all those mentions of disease. And this is probably the biggest example of one of these previous conjunctions, the devastating Spanish flu pandemic. And then on the right-hand side here, this is a photograph taken during the Miracle of the Sun, or the Miracle of Fatima in 1917, which is a famous series of incidents in which some children saw some apparitions of Mary, and these events culminated in this day when thousands of people supposedly saw this very strange phenomena in the sky, the sun appearing to dance and so forth. This is I think we could call a manifestation of spirit, another way to look at the Saturn-Neptune combination. 1952 and 53, we have a lot of stuff that happened at this time. The death of Stalin is in 1953. This is the example a lot of people are aware of. Again, a big milestone for communism, for Russia in particular. Russia resonates with the Saturn-Neptune cycle. This image here, saucers over Washington. We had a massive UFO flap in 1952. There was a sighting of all these saucers over the Capitol building in Washington. UFOs all the rage at that time. The same year, we have the commencement of Project Blue Book, which was the US Air Force's project to investigate the UFO phenomenon. People say it was really a project that was designed from the start to debunk the phenomenon. Essentially, it was a public-facing project that didn't reflect what was going on at sort of deeper levels of the US military. But again, there's something there about kind of Saturn, Neptune. We have a sort of in a kind of attempt to put some structure or get some sort of concrete understanding of something which is Neptunian, which is hard to define, related to the realm of spirit, etc., that kind of thing. We also had the imposition of border controls between East and West Germany in 1952. The East Germans closed the border to West Germany. So we have a kind of, one of the delineations I mentioned, I think it's a kind of crystallization of something that of a border that wasn't enforced before that. So Saturn, Neptune, it can kind of go both ways. We can have the dissolution of borders, but then the imposition of them as well. And something that we see a lot with these conjunctions, particularly as it pertains to Russia, is a crystallization of the boundary of Russia, which is a kind of nebulous thing that's never really been fixed in history. It's always changing, and when these conjunctions come up, it tends to be fixed once again. We also had the beginning of the CIA's MK Ultra project, which was essentially their project to investigate the use of drugs to control people's minds, allegedly to create Manchurian candidates or to understand the process required to do that. And again, this feels quite Saturn-Neptune. We have a kind of program aimed at using drugs, which drugs themselves are Neptunian. But I think the sort of the control of consciousness as well is another way you could delineate Saturn-Neptune. We have that project beginning in 1952. Another interesting event that came around this time is the founding of the Bilderberg Group. Actually happened in 1954, but the two planets were still within orb of conjunction. And we have the founding of this shadowy organization, which meets every few years. It's a kind of Atlanticist organization where we have senior, powerful people from both the US and Europe meeting. What they discuss is kept secret. So, of course, there are a lot of rumors and theories about what they're really about and what they're doing. Some say that the agenda is to impose world government and so forth. But again, there's something about it feels quite Saturn-Neptune to me. Whether we don't quite know exactly what they're up to, let's say, although we can have some ideas, but there's something about perhaps some sort of universalist structure or attempts to control events. And there's a sort of Neptunian aspect to that, right? Because we don't know, they don't release notes of what's said at these conferences and so forth. So a lot happening in this period with these last conjunctions. And then the last conjunction of these planets came in 1989. We have the fall of the Berlin Wall, which we already saw, a big deal, a dissolution of structure. This man here, this is Bob Lazar, very famous in UFO circles. He gave an interview in 1989 to the journalist George Knapp, in which he basically claimed that he was working at Area 51 to deconstruct recovered alien aircraft, essentially, extraterrestrial vehicles, and he was reverse engineering them. And he's a very well-known figure in, say, the ufology. We also have the Belgian UFO wave, big UFO wave in Belgium, lots of sightings of triangular UFOs and so forth. Again, UFOs, as I've talked about in previous videos, do seem to come up quite a lot at Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. I think we're going to see that again this time. So that's a bit of a preamble on Saturn-Neptune. Let's now apply the closing square technique so we can try and figure out what might be coming in the next couple of years. So when were Saturn and Neptune in their closing square? So to decide when, what period you're going to look at, you do need to decide what orb you're going to use. I've decided to use a 10-degree orb. It's a fairly wide orb. Essentially what that means, for those who don't know, 10-degree orb, it means that the planets can be 10 degrees away from an exact square to be considered square. Different astrologers will use different orbs, different schools of astrology even. This is a relatively wide orb. I'm following Richard Tarnas with this 10-degree orb for the square. And that gives us a time period of roughly November 2014 to September 2017. On the left-hand side here, we've got Saturn and Neptune in the start of November 2014. And you can see that Saturn is it's almost 24 degrees Scorpio. Neptune is 4 degrees Pisces. So Saturn there is about 10 degrees away from an exact square with Neptune applying. And then here, if we come to the end of September 2017, Saturn now at this time is at 22 degrees of Sag, Neptune's at 12 degrees of Pisces. So you can see that for this to be an exact square, Saturn would be at 12 degrees of Sag, but it's 10 degrees ahead of that. So it's kind of moving out of orb of the closing square here. So we're going to look at this time period, November 2014 to September 2017, and we're going to say, okay, this period, this is our closing square period. We're going to look at events in this period of the nature of Saturn and Neptune. That's quite key. So we have to look for events that are of the nature of these planets, because obviously there's a lot more going on in the sky. There's all the other planets in other signs and doing other things during the same period. And if we don't consider the nature of the planets, then we might find that we maybe we identify events that are corresponding to other archetypes and other planets, and we attach them to this cycle, and then that way we might go wrong if we're trying to anticipate what's coming at the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So again, we're going to ask, what developments in that period feel like Saturn and Neptune? What things can we look at? What news events can we look at in that period and say, yeah, that feels like Saturn and Neptune in combination. That looks like it's probably a foreshadowing of what's going to come at the conjunction. Okay, so first of all, we had the European migration crisis. If you think about Saturn as borders, Neptune as dissolution of borders, so migration is definitely a Saturn-Neptune phenomenon. And obviously it's very prominent in the news at the moment. And we have Saturn and Neptune pretty much in conjunction now. Just a little excerpt from Wikipedia here on the migration crisis for those who don't know. The 2015 European migrant crisis was a period of significantly increased movement of refugees and migrants into Europe, namely from the Middle East. An estimated 1.3 million people came to the continent to request asylum, the most in a single year since World War II. They were mostly Syrians, but also included a significant number of people from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Nigeria, Eritrea, and the Balkans. The increase in asylum seekers has been attributed to factors such as the escalation of various wars in the Middle East and ISIL's territorial and military dominance in the region due to the Arab winter, as well as Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt ceasing to accept Syrian asylum seekers. So we have huge numbers of migrants going into Europe as a result of the conflict in the Middle East. And it feels very Saturn-Neptune, dissolution of borders, essentially. So a possible manifestation for 2025, 2026, a new migration crisis, a big migration crisis, that we can look back at the 2015 crisis and say, that was foreshadowing what came at this conjunction. I have a clipping here. This is Christoph Niederwieser, excellent German astrologer who's appeared on my channel for a couple of episodes. He's launched a channel in English now called Cronlex Astrology. Which is really great because up until now his channel was just in German. But he started releasing English language videos, and one of the things that he's been saying, he has a video called The Great Flood that he put out a couple of months ago. He believes, as we can see, I'll just read it here, a migration tsunami of completely new dimensions is on the horizon for 2025, 2026. So he's been saying he thinks that there's going to be a huge amount of migration, he's using the word tsunami there, over this period. I don't know his exact rationale for that. He has talked a lot about the age of air, which is the fact that Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions are now happening in air signs. Air has to do with, flow, rapid movement, and so forth. But I presume he has other reasons why he's saying that. I don't know if he is aware of this technique. He may well be. But yeah, so he's been forecasting a huge new migration crisis. This closing square technique would seem to point in that direction too. Some people would say that there already is some kind of migration crisis, but which is arguable depending on your perspective. But this technique seems to suggest that there will be a lot more coming, and you have to wonder, what could cause that. So that's what I'm wondering. If there is going to be a huge amount of migration over this next couple of years, what would cause that? And the obvious culprit is war, of course. Just a little clipping here. Iran warns any attack on its nuclear sites would trigger all-out war. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi tells Al Jazeera that Iran would immediately and decisively, they've missed a word here, I guess, respond to a US or Israeli attack. So, and this is the thing that I'm sort of looking at as having probably the most probability of causing something like this, because to have some huge new amount of migration, there would need to be something new happening, I think, which isn't already underway. And unfortunately, I think some sort of big war in the Middle East would be a possible cause for that. Something I'm particularly, looking at and a little bit concerned about is the Mars-Saturn opposition of August 2025, which I've mentioned in other streams. I've mentioned it a bit on the channel before. I think I mentioned it in my 2025 forecast. On the left-hand side, you can see the chart for 9th of August 2025, and you can see that there's this, what we call a kite formation appearing here, with Mars on the right-hand side, you can see, opposing Saturn, which is conjunct Neptune, and then we have Pluto and Uranus as well, trining Mars, sextiling Saturn-Neptune. You can see this Saturn-Neptune conjunction is also at the midpoint of Pluto-Uranus here. This looks like this is an extremely powerful configuration, and what concerns me a little bit is the fact that this Mars-Saturn cycle, the Mars-Saturn synodic cycle, began in April 2024, when Israel and Iran were attacking each other directly. At the square of those planets in August, we had the same situation coming up again. And every time this came up, we also had the theme of nuclear technology coming up. The Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine was also attacked both in April and August. So the themes of war, both in Ukraine and potentially Iran, Israel, and the theme of nuclear technology seems to be coming up with this Mars-Saturn cycle. And then we have this incredibly powerful kite formation here at the opposition in August. I don't like that at all, honestly. And on the right-hand side, I've put the chart for the beginning of the nuclear age. This is the chart for the first ever nuclear fission reaction, which happened on the 2nd of December, 1942 at the University of Chicago. So this chart seems to be the chart for nuclear technology, essentially. And what I've seen is that when it's triggered, you tend to have events related to that technology. And what we can see is that this configuration, which we can already see from the synodic cycle of Mars and Saturn, seems to have something to do with nuclear technology. This conjunction, or this configuration, is really setting off the nuclear chart at the same time. If you notice that we can see that this is the Uranus opposition of the nuclear age. It's the Neptune opposition of the nuclear age. We have Neptune-Saturn opposing Neptune, this Neptune-Moon conjunction with Mars on the Moon, and Pluto opposing its natal position here as well. So this looks like a a big moment. It could have to do with nuclear technology. Don't know what will happen for sure. Being too specific is often a good way to go wrong in astrology. You kind of come up with a little theory and you think, I know what's going to happen. It's going to be this. And often you go wrong doing that. But if I were to come up with possibilities, something that comes to mind is there going to be some sort of attack between Israel and Iran on nuclear sites or something that then could create contamination, for example, which is something that I would say could force a huge amount of migration. Don't know for sure, but we're trying to put these different pieces together. And one of my fears is just that we see war, we see some potentially even some sort of event related to nuclear technology, and that forces this huge amount of migration, which the closing square technique seems to be pointing towards. So a little bit scary, obviously, and something, one of those areas where you kind of hope to be wrong about that. Again, being too specific, you can often go wrong. So I might have missed something, but that's a little bit of what comes up in my mind about that. What else happened in this closing square period, 2015 to 2017? Well, this was the rise of dis and misinformation, or concern about these things. Obviously, this was the period of the first rise of Donald Trump. We had the word fake news really coming into vocabulary at that time. There was a lot of concern about disinformation, misinformation. Obviously those terms are kind of, the meaning of those terms is up for debate, and they're a bit problematic in my opinion. But I think we all know what they mean. Around this time, we kind of had the rise of what we can call the censorship industrial complex. A lot of organizations and actions were taken at that time to create this sort of structure aimed at combating quote unquote dis and misinformation, which obviously is a little bit in the eye of the beholder. I think we can all agree that there is a lot of bullshit on the internet, but then a lot of this stuff does come down to political questions and so forth. Anyway, the point is that this theme arose in a big way at that time. This also, to me, has the flavor of Saturn-Neptune. I think if we can think about Neptune as kind of ideals and the collective conscious, Saturn is kind of control and structures. We've kind of got attempts to control thoughts, control consciousness, control ideals, etc. It feels Saturn-Neptune to me. So possible manifestation, 2025, 2026. New censorship systems or measures imposed. That's quite vague, but I think it generally pays to not be too specific here. But we are seeing systems that are coming online around this time. So we have the EU digital identity, which a lot of people have raised concerns about. Could this be used to create some kind of social credit system that, akin to what they have in China? We also have CBDCs coming online. The European Central Bank is saying it wants to bring its CBDC, that's a central bank digital currency, online. So yeah, since we've got the closing square foreshadowing these conjunctions, it makes me think there's probably something that's coming into being at this time, aimed at probably controlling, again, quote unquote, misinformation and disinformation, but some kind of big system aimed at doing that. And these technologies, digital identity, CBDCs, could be employed to do that. Now, again, back to the closing square period, CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. We have some of the first examples of those coming into play in our closing square period. So Ecuador, one of the earliest examples of retail CBDC was in Ecuador from 2014 to 2018. So covering our closing square period. when the central bank created a broadly accessible pilot retail CBDC that operated through citizens' mobile phones. It did not employ blockchain technology under the name Dinero Electrónico. Even, okay, well, I won't read the next bit. That's all you really need to know there. So we have an example, a sort of proto-CBDC coming into play in that period. China also really started working on its digital renminbi at this time. Since 2014, China's central bank has been working on a project called DCEP, Digital Currency Electronic Payment, or Digital Renminbi, often also referred to as the digital yuan, as it would be backed by the yuan. At the end of 2017, China's central bank organized a number of banks and institutions to jointly develop the DCEP system. Okay, so we have China putting its CBDC in place, or beginning to, at the closing square period. So, pretty obvious prediction, which you don't really need astrology for, but possible manifestation, major CBDCs arrive. Okay, so we kind of know this is coming, but this is kind of astrology sort of confirming this, or events confirming the astrology, if you like. We have Bank of Russia eyes extensive introduction of digital ruble from July 2025. So Russia's doing this. European Central Bank announces plan to launch CBDC by October 2025. The Europeans are doing this. The Chinese are doing it. Lots of other countries will be doing it. So, yeah, CBDCs 2025, 2026, expect a lot of them. Okay, another example, 2015, the founding of OpenAI. OpenAI Inc. is an American artificial intelligence research organization founded in December 2015 and headquartered in San Francisco, California. It aims to develop safe and beneficial artificial general intelligence, which it defines as highly autonomous systems that outperform humans at most economically valuable work. Okay, so we have the founding of OpenAI at our closing square period. I think generative AI in particular feels very Saturn-Neptune. It's certainly, it kind of allows you to kind of put structure to your imagination, let's say, or you kind of with the image generation tools, you just type in some text and you get the image appears. You know, it feels quite Saturn-Neptune. So this kind of technology that materializes what comes from the imagination. Depending on who you ask, some people would even say AI is an attempt to manifest spirit as well. Again, Saturn, Neptune. So we have the closing square. We have OpenAI being founded. So possible manifestation in 2025, 2026. Since the organization was founded at the closing square, you'd expect there's probably going to be some really significant AI milestone at the times of this conjunction. So the obvious possibility is AGI, whatever that may be. Sam Altman claims AGI is coming in 2025 and machines will be able to think like humans when it happens. Sam Altman is a bit of a hype man, of course. He hypes stuff up, which then encourages people to invest in his companies. But this technique, to me, does seem to point in the direction that we can expect some sort of major milestone around AI over the course of this coming period. And quote unquote AGI seems like a good candidate for that development. Okay, another interesting thing that came at the closing square, 2016, we have the Brexit vote. Saturn-Neptune, dissolution of structures, right? So we have a major member of the EU voting to leave and then initiating the process to leave in 2017. That seems very Saturn-Neptune and it seems significant. 2015, we also had the Greek debt crisis. There's a lot of trouble in Greece over Greece's debt issues. Just a little excerpt from Wikipedia here. After a popular referendum which rejected further austerity measures required for the third bailout, and after closure of banks across the country, which lasted for several weeks, on 30th of June 2015, Greece became the first developed country to fail to make an IMF loan repayment on time. So this was hugely significant for the EU. Again, more trouble for the EU and another one of its members, Greece. This also feels kind of Saturn-Neptune to me as well, these kind of economic problems. So, possible manifestation, trouble for Europe. Will more states leave the EU? The fact that the UK left at the closing square period, it makes me wonder, is that a foreshadowing? Are we going to see more of that? Are we going to see the Greek debt crisis? Is that a foreshadowing of trouble for Europe? This technique would point in that direction. So we have political crises in France and Germany spell more trouble for Europe's ailing economy analysis. So we've got, this was a story that I just clipped yesterday. So we've got according to some sources, a big economic crisis coming for Europe anyway. Another story clipping here, far-right AfD party wants Germany to leave the EU. Now, it seems kind of hard to believe that Germany would leave the EU, but I just clipped this just to point out that there are suggestions in different places in Europe sometimes of the possibility of states leaving. Who knows what's going to come in the next couple of years? A lot is going to happen, no doubt. Things might look very different in a year's time. And so while it seems kind of unlikely that more states might follow the UK out of the EU, and I'm not saying I'm predicting that definitely will happen. What I am saying is this technique would kind of potentially point in that direction. Another example, 2015, we have the Minsk II agreement. So I mentioned earlier about the frontier of Russia, the border of Russia, and Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, and how that theme tends to come up over and over again at Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. This is something I've talked about before in a previous live stream, which I'll show you later. But back to this Minsk II agreement that came again at the time of the closing square of the last Saturn-Neptune cycle. Minsk II refers to the Second Minsk Agreement, a diplomatic framework aimed at ending the conflict in eastern Ukraine, signed on February the 12th, 2015 in Minsk, Belarus. The agreement was negotiated between Ukraine, Russia, representatives of the self-declared separatist republics, and mediated by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. France and Germany participated actively, with German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President François Hollande playing key roles. Okay, so we have a deal done between Ukraine and Russia here, essentially over the conflict, over the borders between those countries at the closing square. So possible manifestation, 2025, 2026, the Russia-Ukraine border is fixed. This is the live stream I was talking about. This was before I was giving these different live streams their own thumbnails, but it was you can find it on the website, live stream, Saturn, Neptune conjunctions and history. So I give a presentation in that stream on these previous Saturn-Neptune conjunctions going all the way back to, I think it was 1703, the founding of St. Petersburg. Over and over again at these conjunctions, you find the border of Russia, generally it's kind of refixed at the time of these conjunctions. So, if you're following what's going on in the news, it would make a lot of sense, right? That this is what we're gonna see over the course of this conjunction. Okay, what else? 2015, 2016. So we saw earlier about these conjunctions, according to the Uranian rulebook, have to do with disease. The major outbreak that I've noticed at this time was the Zika virus. You might remember this Zika virus. It's spread by mosquitoes. And in 2015, 2016, there was a big outbreak of this virus in the Americas. This Zika virus, if pregnant women are infected with this virus, it seems to cause microcephaly. This baby here has this condition which causes a certain shape of the cranium, and I think learning difficulties and so forth. So really difficult consequences if pregnant women catch this virus. So, possible manifestation, new epidemic or pandemic. I'm not totally confident on this one, but the rulebook does say, does relate Saturn-Neptune to pestilence or plague. I've looked back at previous conjunctions. The live stream that I just mentioned about when I talked about Russia, I also looked at pandemics, epidemics during Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. There does always seem to be something at these conjunctions, not always big outbreaks though necessarily. The Spanish flu is the biggest one I could find, I think. But there was pretty much always something. That's not necessarily that useful information though, because there are always, pretty much in history, if you look back, there's always something going on. There's always an epidemic of something somewhere. So this is one of the predictions. I wouldn't say I'm too confident about this. This is a kind of fallace in sort of maybe. And again, maybe that Zika virus was foreshadowing something that comes in the next couple of years. Also, 2015, the Paris Climate Agreement. I think we could associate the planet Neptune with climate, among others. It has to do with oceans and water and so forth. Not the only planet I would associate there, but definitely seems to be related. Saturn, Neptune, some kind of structure agreement to sort of control emissions and so forth. These were some of the major agreement or parts of the Paris Climate Agreement. Limit the average global temperature increase to less than 2 degrees centigrade and achieve net zero emissions by mid-century. So that phrase net zero, you can trace it back to the Paris Agreement and beyond. Number 2, enhance resilience and adaptation to climate impacts certain to occur. And number 3, align financial flows in the world with these objectives. So we have the Paris Agreement there, and that would seem to me, since it was at the closing square, to suggest that something's coming in relation to it at the conjunction 2025-2026. Possible manifestation, a system to enforce the Paris climate goals or a new agreement. Slightly complicating this, the US is going to be withdrawing from the Paris climate agreement. Trump's withdrawn, but it won't actually come into effect until 2026, which is kind of interesting. So we have the US withdrawing from this deal at this time. So this is another one which is, I'm not super confident about, but what I would probably expect is that there's something that comes into play that brings some of these themes together. CBDCs, digital IDs, etc., and then emissions, net zero, all of this stuff. Does some kind of system come into the world, probably led by, I guess, the Europeans now, and some of these international organizations, the UN, our friends, the World Economic Forum, that is aimed at achieving the Paris climate goals, at least ostensibly, but that also involves some kind of big centralized control system that's something I could certainly see. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and want to know more about the possibilities for the next couple of years, then I suggest you watch this video, in which I dive deep into the weirder side of conjunctions of Saturn and Neptune. Thanks, and see you next time.